Great. And then the poll will come up in a few moments. I do want to welcome Mike Miklos. Mike Miklos is formerly with Patton, if anybody knows Patton. He's been there for about 18 years, and he was one of the leads for the Autism Initiative, which we're so thankful for because that actually got ABA out into our schools because it wasn't previously there. So again, we're so fortunate to have him come tonight to present. Mike, feel free to take it away. And everybody, I'll be looking for your questions. All right. Thank you so much. And you can screen share, Mike.
Okay. Hold on here. Okay. So let me get the screen share. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here and be able to talk to you. And I certainly hope that this presentation is helpful to you and your families. ABA is such a fascinating field of endeavor, and I'm really grateful to have had a long career in applied behavior analysis. Although I was with Patton 18 years, I have been doing behavior analysis for quite some time. There are now, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands of board certified behavior analysts. I came in early. I'm number 224 in that list. So I was an early bird to the practice of applied behavior analysis. With that said, in 2 hours time, an hour tonight and an hour tomorrow, for me to summarize a endeavor that is as complex and as thorough and detailed as applied behavior analysis, it's next to impossible. I will not be able to do that. What I'm hoping to do is to just give you an introduction, to talk about some issues that are of interest to you in your concern for your child and for your family and for those who serve. I have put together the PowerPoint, which I'm hoping that Benita and Art can make available to everybody. I'm very happy to share that. This is a two-part session, as Benita just said. So keep in mind, I will attempt to get to as much as possible over the next 2 nights, but I may not get to everything. Each session, as was stated, we'll have time for comments and questions. So I'm hoping you can all see my screen here because sometimes life is a little nutty. The picture on the left of the screen is of a pine cone that produces pinion nuts. And pinion nuts are nuts that are used, frequently called pine nuts in Italy, and they're used in a variety of delectable recipes and are very tasty things. If you look on the other side, there are two hands up like this, if you can see my hands. In one hand, there are two pinions. In the other hand, there is one pinion. So what do you have? A difference of opinion. Okay. All right. So you might have thought that was a joke. You may not have thought that was a joke. One of the things that I want to point out is there are differences of opinion about behavior analysis. There are some people who have had experiences with people who were said to be doing behavior analysis or did not have successful interventions used with the individuals they care about. And they view applied behavior analysis as a field of endeavor that is all about this stimulus response thinking and just training things in a very mechanical kind of fashion. That kind of opinion suggests that behavior analysis can't address complex phenomena, like what makes a joke funny? You know, what is it about a joke that's funny? The critics say that ABA will hurt children because it focuses on rote skills, and it's all about controlling the individuals. the individual in question, and that ABA denies individual experiences and individual differences. Well, the facts about ABA as defined is that ABA can really address any aspect of human behavior, including complex topics like how do you establish conversational skills? How do you teach somebody to understand a joke? How do you help an individual emit better emotional responding? And it can address reasoning. How do we problem solve? What do we do when things go south and we don't know what to do? ABA is a flexible system. It's adjusted to outcomes, and it changes with both changes in the individual and changes in the environment. ABA, by definition, has to be flexible. And I'm going to be talking more about that as we go, and about how it is flexible and what are the limits of it. ABA is focused on the individual. Actually, ABA has a tendency, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, to not look at large-scale statistical studies. It's more concerned about what is happening with the individual, what are they doing in a particular situation, and how can things be changed to give that person more skills so they have more choices of what to do in future situations that share those characteristics. The focus is on changing skills, not on changing who a person is. So applied behavior analysis is interested in issues such as what causes us to do what we do? What causes children or students to do what they do? What causes teachers and school staff to do what they do? You know, what are the reasons for people doing the things they do? It's a pretty big, complex question. And what does ABA have to do with it? Well, it provides a way of looking at what people do as a relation between the person's behavior, what they do, and how the world at various levels changes as a result of what the person is doing. Now, there are many common explanations for why people do what they do. And these explanations, and I want to emphasize here that these are not wrong explanations. They are actually very important descriptions of why people do what they do. There's no doubt about it, and no behavior analyst who provides quality services would deny these issues. These are important. One explanation that is often used is the brain. Okay, people will say, well, the individual does what they do because of the way they're wired, because of their neurological system. But the question is, what is a brain? Okay, what is a brain? And how does it function? When you look at it, a brain is simply a mass of neurons contained in fluid inside the skull. If you cut open a brain and look at it, it really looks like goop. I'm sorry to say, very complicated goop, very important goop. I wouldn't want to go through life without that goop. But it's really just a very complex molecules and proteins that function. Well, keep in mind that the brain functioning, the brain providing neural impulses to the rest of the body and receiving neural impulses from our sensory system would not work if it was disconnected from the body. If you put a brain in a vat, a tub, a vat, what would the brain do? It could not do anything. The brain has to be connected to other systems. There's some beautiful work being done with teaching people who are have had physical disabilities such as ALS to be able to be connected to machines that would read the action of the brain and be able to do something. Once again, though, that is completely consistent with what I'm saying. The brain only works in relation to other systems. The brain does what it does because it's connected to the rest of our body and to the rest of the world. Those links are necessary. And figuring out a way to determine the link between what we're able to sense in the world and what our bodies are able to do to manipulate the world we live in is critical. Brains can't do it alone. Another common explanation for behavior is our genes. People do what they do because they've inherited this tendency to do what they do. The genes are, because they are tied to our history as a species, they guide what we do on a minute-to-minute basis and have us and control the outcome. That we do what we do because we've inherited this tendency to behave certain ways. Well, it is true that genes build our bodies. Genes work through the process of DNA, RNA, non-nuclear DNA and RNA. They build proteins. That's what genes do. They build proteins. And our bodies are basically made out of these proteins, some very complicated proteins, such as proteins that build the brain. It's phenomenally complex, and it's a beautiful case of evolutionary history shaping what we do. But the question is, how do proteins know what's going on in the world? We have this bodybuilding that takes place because the genes build these proteins, but the genes only build those proteins when the raw materials are there. For instance, people who have blue eyes would not have blue eyes unless there was copper in the body. The genes only build blue eyes if there is copper in the individual's a body as they're developing. Genes build our hands, but because our hands are built, it doesn't mean that our hands know what to do with the telephone. That takes an interaction between our bodies and the world around us. So genes build our bodies based on our ancestral environments through evolutionary processes, but those genes can't tell that we're going to be interacting with Uber drivers or with using an ATM machine or learning how to get a cafeteria tray or other aspects. So those are two main explanations for behavior. A third explanation for behavior is our emotions. People will say things, well, why did you do it? Well, I felt like doing it. He did it because he was mad. He did it or she did it because she was nervous. I was afraid, so I did this. Well, emotions are critical, and emotions occur for a whole range of complex reasons. But what explains our emotions? If emotions cause us to do things, what causes the emotions? If I was out walking in the woods and I saw a bear, okay, I saw a bear, my tendency would be to be afraid. Does that explain why I run from the bear? I don't think so. I think if I saw a bear, I would run from the bear and I would feel afraid. The fear helps generate responses that are adaptive to the situation. But fear is a behavior, much like running, and it also needs to be explained. What are the conditions that lead us to feel that way? Well, what I've been talking about so far is the idea that we as people are always in an environment. And this is a picture of the cosmic background radiation. And it's, we are always embedded in some environment. Has anybody here, and this is I don't need you to answer this question because I think I know the answer, but has anybody here ever not been in an environment, not been in a situation where your senses are contacting the world in some way? From the moment we are conceived until we are no longer on this planet, our bodies are in constant contact with the world around us. And the reason our brains, our emotions, and our genes work as beautifully as they do is because they help us adapt to the situations we experience in our day-to-day lives. And that means there might be some principles that guide us to understand how we respond to the world that is constantly affecting what we do. So the point I'm getting at here is applied behavior analysis is based on behavioral principles. And the behavioral principles that I'm going to be talking about it can be said to be the idea that we do things in life because of our past experience. Experience guides us. Now, when I say experience, I'm talking really broadly here. All experiences, I'm not excluding any, and this is not a sense of, and I want to be very clear on this. Our interactions with other people are only one kind of experience, okay? An important experience, but there are other things that shape what we do on a minute-to-minute basis. Brains and genes and emotions are very important. Physiology is critical. It sets limits and provides the basis for responding. How we feel matters deeply, but one cannot learn to do anything that matters in life without experience, without being guided by our current environment, the environment that shapes us on our day-to-day life. Well, let me give you an example of this, and I'm sorry if I'm a little geeky here, folks, but one of the things I like to do is go out and hike, and I like to look at nature. So I would ask you, and I hope you can see these two pictures. Sometimes these Zoom screens don't allow clear pictures, but I would ask you, are these two lizards that you see on the screen, are they the same kind of lizard? Well, I don't think most people would be able to answer that question. They could take a guess. Well, they look different. One's stripier than the other's brown. Well, the fact of the matter is they are the same species. The darker lizard is an adult broadhead skink, and the striped lizard on the right is an immature skink. How in the world could anyone know that? Would your brain tell you that? Your brains didn't tell you that right now, because I doubt anybody here studies broadhead skinks other than me, okay? I'm sorry about my weird things I do. But, you're not able to tell those apart. Why not? And why could I do it? It's not because I'm a magician. It's because I learned these things through experience. I looked at field guides to reptiles. I had friends who are herpetologists explain the differences, and I've studied it. Experience guided me. My brain, my genes, and my feelings don't help me with this kind of response. Now, you might be saying something to yourself like, what the heck is he talking about lizards for? Well, I'll tell you what, life is not unlike trying to tell lizards apart. When we go to order a cup of coffee, we are making decisions that are based on experience. There is no gene in your body for ordering coffee. It is learned through the process of being in a coffee shop, being able to wait for a person to look at you, see that person, and be able to say you want coffee in whatever way you're communicating. It's a set of things we do that have been guided by our environments. So a basic principle of behavior analysis is that A person does things in certain conditions. As a result of doing something, the world changes. Now, this is a small comment I just made, but it's critical to understanding applied behavior analysis. All I'm saying there is that if I lean into the screen as I'm monitoring my face gets a little bigger. That alters how close I am to the screen because the world changed because I moved. When I'm talking with my hands, it helps me emphasize a point that my hand movement is correlated with it. And sometimes you're not going to be able to see my hands, but my past moving a hand helped me move in a way that generated the flow of speech as I'm talking. If I take a drink of water, my hand touching the glass changes the world because now there's a glass of water in my hand. And when I bring it up to my mouth, the water hits my mouth and the world has changed again. Every little thing we do changes the world. Now, the critical thing that predicts whether we're likely to do something in a similar situation in the future or not is called the reinforcement principle. When things get better for us after we do something, we tend to do those same things again. Now, I don't want you to think about this principle in a way that is overly simplistic, because this principle actually gets quite complicated. And there are certain situations where, and I'll be covering this probably in tomorrow night's talk a little bit, where the reinforcer for a response is not always clearly identifiable. But nonetheless, whenever we do something, the world changes. If things improve for us, we tend to do that, something like that again in the future in similar circumstances. If things get worse after we do something, we do that thing less often. This is quite complex, and I'm oversimplifying it. In an hour for me to go over all of the details of this is not possible. I've spent, like I said, 30 some years of my life studying behavior analysis, and I feel like a rookie, like I'm just learning it. There's so much to learn. This reinforcement principle, though, has some very significant implications, because we can't change the individual, and nobody wants to change who somebody is or is not. But I think it's a clear fact that people who have a change in how well they could manipulate the world they're in, who can do things to alter the world at a level that is effective, are going to have better lives at whatever level we can establish those skills. The job of a teacher is not to change the individual, but to teach the individual to do new things in different environments. That is a big responsibility, which is why I am have been so honored to work with so many good teachers over the years. Teachers are critical. So this idea of altering the environment to change behavior. In 1958, B.F. Skinner, who was the founder of behavior analysis in many ways, was at a conference in California. And there was a speaker there named Erich Fromm, who was from a Freudian tradition, and basically went on about how he was arguing that people learn in ways that are different from pigeons, and that people can't learn or be guided by environmental experience. And he said, people can't change my behavior like you could change a pigeon. Well, B.F. Skinner realized that that's a pretty pessimistic way of looking at things, that if we could help somebody learn to do something different, it could make a big difference in somebody's lives. And knowing how to do things makes life better for people. So Skinner, on a scrap of paper, wrote to somebody who was sitting nearby, "Watch Fromm's left hand. I'm going to shape a chopping motion, and he passed it down the table to Halleck Hoffman. Fromm was sitting directly across from Skinner and was speaking mostly to Skinner. Skinner turned his chair slightly so that he could see him out of the corner of his eye. So when Fromm was talking, he was doing like I'm doing. He's gesticulating, moving his hands around quite actively. And whenever his left hand came up, Skinner would look directly at him. If he brought the hand down, Skinner would nod and smile. He did this, and within 5 minutes, Erich Fromm's left hand was chopping the table, even though he had just denied that that humans are susceptible to environmental relations. And Skinner said it was an unfair trick, but something had to be done to demonstrate that we're all susceptible to environments, every one of us. Well, I just gave an example of a case from the history of psychology, but we see reinforcement working and shaping us all in our everyday life all the time. You know, you go to the grocery store and there's a long line in one aisle. What do? You're scanning around looking for the shorter aisle. You go to the shorter aisle. Why? Because it improves things to be in a shorter aisle. If you're lucky, you get to go through the line quicker. You're driving down the road. The light turns red and you put on the brakes to stop. Why? Because you avoid worsening conditions. Things improve for you. Your car doesn't get hit. You get to drive your car through without getting a ticket or without getting in an accident. You're going through the subway and you put your card into the turnstile and the turnstile doesn't turn. What do? You put the card in again. Why? Because in the past, when you put it in a different way, it worked. You're talking to a person and the person is looking at you. Then they look away and they start looking at something else. What do? You stop talking. This happens all the time. When we're communicating with somebody, if a person's looking at us, we'll talk to them. If they look away, we don't. If you see a certain time on a clock, like 7 o'clock on March 29th, what do? You turn on Zoom. Why? Because when you turn on Zoom, you get to listen to me go through this talk with you. Lucky you guys. Okay. You smell pumpkin. And all of a sudden you say to yourself, fall. Why is that? Because in the past, you've seen pumpkins in the fall. You're connecting pumpkins and fall as a matter of experience. You're sitting there and you want to say, oh, well, that's an interesting thing he just said. I better write that down. What do? You look down and you see a pen. What do when you see the pen? You pick it up. So something as simple as looking results in seeing. Reaching results in touching. Almost every little thing we do alters the environment in some way. And this suggests that there might be some basic principles that can help us understand these relations between the environment and what we do. So behavior analysis is really not what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of this presentation, except a little bit. Behavior analysis is a science. It's a science dedicated to the principles of behavior. And I have human behavior, but it's really behavior. It's across species. And behavior analysts often talk about organisms rather than specific species. And behavior analysis is really an experimental look. It's closer to pure science. It's looking to establish principles of why people and other organisms do what they do. And this science has found that humans always do things in environments, and that how environments change in a regular pattern can alter what an individual does in a regular pattern. So behavior analysis is a science looking at the relations between. Okay, so we're back to recording. Okay, applied behavior analysis is the use of the principle. They're not looking to manipulate something to find out something new about the world. They're looking to apply the science of behavior analysis to help people's lives be better. So the person has a richer set of things they can do, and therefore a richer set of experiences. Applied behavior analysis is really a lot more like engineering. You know, bridge builders aren't scientists, but bridge builders use science to do something practical. Okay. And when you're building a bridge, if your bridge doesn't comport with science, doesn't match up with the science, it's going to fall down, and it's going to be a terrible set of circumstances. Well, applied behavior analysis is the same way. We have to build bridges for people so that they are able to do things that stand up over time to make their lives better. Applied behavior analysis is engineering the environment to provide experiences that lead a person to have more skills and more choices in life at whatever level that can be accomplished. So this idea of behavior analysis is important, and it is critical in education, because what is education? I tend to look at education as a process of behavior change. When a student walks into a classroom, they bring a set of skills, a set of experiences, and when they walk out of the classroom, they should have new experiences and new skills. They should be able to do something different that is measurable, that is able to be demonstrated. If we want children to learn, we need to use teaching methods that clearly establish outcomes that can be seen, that are tangible. Okay, and that is a tough thing. Like when we're talking about reading, what's reading? Okay, it's hard to define what reading is, because reading is actually a whole mess of a little skills that build to being able to engage in a complex set of skills. So if a child comes in and doesn't have the ability to understand phonetic relations, understand, sound letter correspondences, and to blend sounds, or if they're missing vocabulary skills, they should have an increased vocabulary. They should be able to blend sounds when they leave the classroom, and we should be able to show that. Learning needs to be demonstrable. It's a person being to do something different. And that's what ABA is about. That's what I was saying earlier. ABA focuses on environmental behavior relations. These interventions that are designed to teach in schools should be manipulating circumstances, not the child. So how many times does the child get to respond to a particular letter sound relation? Might predict, and when they get it right, do things get better for them in some way? Okay, these are important critical aspects. And it's true about teaching skills related to reading, but it's also true about teaching skills such as learning to talk, being able to have a larger vocabulary, being able to use some alternative mode of communication to communicate. We're still looking at, can the child do something that they couldn't do before? Applied behavior analysis in the school also is a humble process. And I say this because, and you'll see as I get into the definitions of AABA, that AABA is always a little bit questioning. Are we right? Are we doing the right thing? And the only way we know that is by measuring, taking data. Because we all know that, and I don't know about you, but me, I'm easily fooled by certain things that come up in life that I think are one way. And The other night I was at out at a show with some friends, and somebody walked by and I said, "Hey, Dave." And I made a complete mistake. The person wasn't my friend Dave at all. It was somebody completely different, but they shared some similarity, and I was fooled. We're all fooled by those kind of getting through life is complicated because there's so many different things that can occur. The point I'm making is that teachers want children to achieve. Parents want children to achieve. And sometimes we will look at interventions and say they are working when we don't have any proof that the child can actually do something different. That's why we have to measure. We have to take data. Data is important. Remember what I said, teaching involves altering what the person does, teaching new skills, but we're not changing who the person is. And the other thing I want to say is back to this notion of humility, there are limits of what can be taught. No one can teach me at this point in my life to be a ballet artist. Now, maybe when I was a young boy, somebody could have taught me how to do a ballet, but my movements have been shaped for so long that you're not going to make that leap at this point. And second of all, my bones are so ossified with age that they don't quite move the same way they did when I was youthful. You can't teach a fish to talk in words because they don't breathe air. Okay, there are limits to what can be taught. Okay, and that's important to keep in mind. Now, within human functioning, however, the outcomes that can be achieved by individuals are great, but they will only be achieved if there is solid, well-designed, systematic instruction. So let me just talk about data a little bit more here, because it's a key part of ABA. ABA is really looking to be responsive to how a child is learning. If we don't keep track of things, we're not going to know if the child has gained skills. And in 2 hours, I'm not going to be able to get into what makes good data, or when do you take data, when do you not take data. But I do want to talk on that some record of how a child is learning is critical. Number one, because human memory is quite fallible. Most of us overestimate our ability to remember things. Okay, if you look up Elizabeth Loftus, Loftus, on the internet at some point after this talk, and look what she has to say about expert witness. She's a psychologist who has guided lawyers in their practice. And she has demonstrated quite clearly that people's memories, what they say happened when they observed something, are quite manipulable by variables such as how was the question asked, what happened between the time they saw what they saw and they talked about it. All those variables alter memory. Data is simply a way of helping us remember what happened, and it helps us, especially if we're putting it in a visual format, to see a pattern of performance and how behavior is changing. This means we're not guessing about whether an intervention works or not. We have some evidence that the way we taught has gotten outcomes. But keep in mind, this is not to be confused with a statement such as take data on everything. That is not what I'm saying at all. There's no way you can take data on every aspect of life, because all of human life is very complicated. You got to look at taking data on key skills and seeing how those key skills change. Those skills that you are interested in teaching, because they are key skills that are going to improve the individual's life. Data systems, when teaching, should not interfere with the actual instruction. So behavior analysts are helpful to guiding teachers to make changes in the environment so that certain behaviors are more likely. They alter what happens before and after a person does something. By controlling the environment, you can alter what a person learns to do. And I've said that throughout this talk, and I'll be saying it again throughout the rest of the talk and tomorrow too. Behavior analysis is all about the relation between what a person does and the situation they do it in, which is what makes behavior analysis unique, in that it is not a science that divorces the person from their experiences. It includes looking very carefully at experiences and the person. To say that a person does something because of what's inside them is denying the critical variable, the critical aspect of that person's life is, and that is, what are the circumstances in which they're doing things. So it does lead to ethical issues, because like all people who are concerned about human change, behavior analysts have to be concerned with the question, do I control the environment or do I not control the environment? What do I control? What do I not control? And what about the individual's right to choose? Should the person choose what they're going to change and what they're not going to change? Where does human choice come into this? And it is an identity issue to some extent. Does changing what a person do change who they are? Well, perhaps. I know I'm not, because I do things differently now, I'm not the same person I was at a younger age. My younger self couldn't tell the difference between two types of lizards. Now I can. My younger self could not design a good program to decrease problem behavior because I might not have been as prone to looking at the relation between what does the problem behavior do for the individual? How is it changing the environment? And the idea is, if choice enters into the question, is it right to not provide an education? What if the child chooses not to go to school? There was a famous article that asks an ethical question. Does a client, and it was written in the mental health field rather than education, but does a client have the right to eat donuts all day and take long naps? Well, perhaps the individual does, but what are the outcomes? What does that mean for the future? Are you giving that child a choice? Really? I mean, if all you do is eat donuts and take long naps all day, are you going to learn? Are you going to be more independent? Is that going to be lead to an acceptable outcome for the individual? What are the limits of what we should change? And if it is important and ethical, and if there's changing behavior leads to more choice for the individual, is it right to do that? I am a behavior analyst, and I hope you're hearing me ask these hard questions, because if behavior analysts aren't asking these kind of questions, they're probably not really behavior analysts, because every decision we make has an ethical implication. And I, before I go on to the next slide, I want to say one more thing about that if we are deciding to provide an education, education should be set up to help a person learn to do things that help them be better citizens, be more independent, have better ability to survive, and be able to do things that make their life better and the life of others around them better. So it really becomes a very challenging issue. And the issue is, if we're educating, what is it we can educate? Behavior analysis as a science doesn't answer those questions. That's where the complex problem of IEPs, of curricular design, of society saying what should be in state standards, all of those things come together to help us figure out what we should teach and what we shouldn't teach. But I think at an ethical, it's absolutely at the core of good education to be considering what is going to give the person the most choice going forward? What is going to give them the skills they need to access life in whatever way it is possible? Well, science proceeds, and I'm going to jump to a topic here. What is good scientific practice? Well, good scientific practice is there's reliability in performing research. It's objective. There's duty of care, so you're not doing harm to subjects in any way. You're impartial and you're independent in viewing the results of your science. You're honest and you're reflecting data in the way the data falls. Your fairness in giving credit to other people. Science is open, and it's the responsibility of science and researchers in the future to behave this way. Science is also driven by a concept called philosophical doubt. We can never be absolutely certain that things are the way they are. We have to measure, we have to change, we have to see how things occur when we change things, and that evidence should drive statements about nature. Science is never certain. It's the uncertainty principle. Science only narrows the degree to which we know something. This is very hard in our current day and age. Everybody wants hard and fast answers. It is this way or it is that way. Well, the real questions of science is, how much is it like this? To what degree is it this way? To what degree can a person do this? Okay. Science also has a theory, the atomic theory, in which things are made of component parts. This is consistent with behavior. Behavior is made of component parts. And if I'm teaching a new behavior, such as picking up the glass, I may need to teach opening and closing the hands. I may need teaching moving to the glass. I may need to teach the anti-gravitational force of moving my arms here to pick up the glass. I may need to establish a motivation, a reason to pick up the glass. All these component parts are critical in education, and it's a central component of science. And things are always relative. And this is an important component of behavior analysis. We can only talk about things in relation to something else. If I said, do I know the word pen? Well, do I know it in relation to this pen? Do I know it in the relation to this pen or to some other pen? How many pens can I say pen to? Perhaps there's a weird pen that looks like a feather that I can't say pen to. Learning is always relative. Those basic principles of science are reflected in the dimensions of applied behavior analysis. Applied behavior analysis has several, and this is from an article by Bear, Wolf, and Risley, the article that defined applied behavior analysis in 1968. Basically, applied behavior analysis has seven main principles. One is it's applied, which means that we're taking the principles of behavior analysis and using them to improve people's lives in real situations. We're bridge builders, we're not physicists exploring tension, okay? The second aspect of behavior analysis is that it's behavioral. It deals with measurable behavior and it deals with measurable events in the environment. That's what the behavioral means here. It's measuring not only what the person does, but it's measuring some aspect of the environment that would lead a person to do something in a certain situation. It's also analytical in that analytical in this sense, the way it's talked about here, means that applied behavior analysis looks at demonstrating that If the child has learned to say glass, when they see this, they should say glass. And we should be able to document that that has indeed happened. Applied behavior analysis is also technological, meaning that you can define the interventions in some way that they could be replicated and done with anybody who is working with the child, that they're described in a way that can be replicated. Applied behavior analysis is also conceptually systematic. It is not a bag of tricks, okay? And too often behavior analysis is seen as a bag of tricks. It's seen as, oh, we're going to use a token economy. We're going to use timeout. We're going to, and that is not what applied behavior analysis is. What applied behavior analysis does is it takes a systematic principle such as reinforcement and says, well, here's the class of behaviors we want to see. We want to teach a child to name pens. So we're going to show them all these different pens, and we're going to make sure that when they say pen in the presence of pen, things get better for them in some way, in some way. How that consequence works needs to be defined systematically as well. And that's not always a simple issue. Another aspect of applied behavior analysis is that it is effective. So if somebody says they tried behavior analysis and applied behavior analysis and it didn't work, well, they're probably not using applied behavior analysis. With this said, it doesn't mean that every intervention that is designed by a behavior analyst or by a teacher guided by a behavior analyst is going to work. That would be absurd. But if you're taking data and you see that something is not working, behavior analysis is going to make a change. And they're going to work to see a change in the direction that will help that individual acquire some skill that'll be helpful to them. And finally, applied behavior analysis is characterized by the principle of generality. Interventions are designed to operate in environments so that the skill can be demonstrated when it's needed, even in new environments. So I just went through the dimensions, the characteristics of behavior analysis. I hope in doing so, you sort of got the idea that behavior analysis is not a thing. It is not a protocol. People say, I don't like that ABA program. Well, ABA is not a program. Applied behavior analysis can work with almost any program to set up a way of looking at, well, when the program is run, what is going on before the individual does something? What do they do? And what happens afterwards? And can we discern, can we figure out a relation between what are the circumstances in which somebody does something and what do they do? And how can we help that individual learn to do something in those circumstances that is going to be of benefit to the individual? ABA is a process. It's a conceptual system that could be used to guide a whole range of programs. I could come up with some goofy interventions such as the macaroni and cheese box intervention on the head. And I suggest that by shaking a macaroni and cheese box on somebody's head is going to cause them to know algebra. Well, that's a pretty goofy intervention, I would assume most of us would think. But I could use behavior analysis to see if it works. Okay, how much algebra do they know to begin with? Use the macaroni technique. How much do they know afterwards? If there's none, we've used ABA to quickly get rid of a useless intervention. That's ABA, as much as is the process of teaching somebody linear functions systematically. Okay, teaching without a doubt is a behavior change program. There is not an education program that's out there that's the educational goal isn't in some way to have the individual be different as a result of teaching. Why would we have education at all if that weren't the case? So if teaching is a behavior change process, we should be using a conceptual system that helps us evaluate if what we are doing actually works. So ABA is just that. It's a way of looking at what happens before somebody does something. What is it they do? We define the outcomes of learning as behavior, as the movements of the individual, and we look at how does the environment change after a person does something. That is what ABA is. So I'm going to end on this slide. Well, maybe I have 2 minutes. I'll through this slide. First of all, based on what I have said, I want to reiterate some points from the Educational Law Center, who have stated that ABA can fit anywhere in an IEP. They also reiterate the point I just made. ABA is not a specific program. There are ABA-based programs, or programs that utilize the principles of behavior analysis. ABA is a set of principles upon which educational programs are based. And it is the most researched approach for teaching students on the autism spectrum. And that continues to be true. And there are, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow night, but there are a number of meta-analysis of outcomes of interventions that say that those that are guided by ABA are most likely to work. So I will start with this brief slide on ABA and the IEPs next week, and I'll get it tomorrow night, and I will get into some of the details of this antecedent behavior consequence relation tomorrow. So Benita, I'm gonna stop there. I think it's exactly 8 o'clock now. I hope everybody who might not stick around for question and answers comes back tomorrow night to hear some more of the nuts and bolts that I'll be getting into at that point. Tonight was about setting the stage for that.
Mike, we're going to end the recording now, if you don't mind. And then